Hello there, welcome to Bot101. I'm Angela Nishimoto, and today we're going to continue with our survey of gymnosperms and go on from there. Okay, so today we're doing gymnosperms part 2. Okay, so last time we were talking about the Pinophyta. We talked about the Ginkgophyta with one particular species in a monotypic phylum, and we talked about the Cycadophyta. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about the Cnidophyta, or the Cnidophytes. Okay, they comprise about 70 species in 3 very distinctive genera. Okay, in fact, the 3 genera don't appear to be that closely related to each other. Okay, this is like a catch-all phylum, like we saw catch-all kingdoms before, like the catch-all kingdom Protista, right? But one thing that they all have in common is that they have their vessels. They have vessels in the xylem, whereas the other kinds of gymnosperms we saw do not have vessels. They only have tracheids. Okay, so more than half of the Cnidophytes are ephedra species, and they're also known as joint furs. Okay, and these are shrubby plants that live in the dry areas of Southwest North America. Okay, they're shrubby. They have tiny leaves. They're only in 2s and 3s at the nodes. Okay, and they turn brown. So when the leaves are mature, they're brown. Okay, so here's an ephedra. And here you can see the little whorl of leaves at the node right here. And along some areas, along some of these other stems here. You can see it's kind of like a shrubby plant, very much adapted to a kind of dry area. Okay, it doesn't have much to speak of leaves at all. Okay, so the stems and branches have a slight ribbing to them. Remember, like the ribs of the Ecosetoms or the Xenophytes, the Xenophyta. Okay, they're ribbed, right? And the stems and branches are photosynthetic when the plant is young, or when the stem is young. Okay, now in these plants, okay, you have ovules producing a tubular extension, and this pretty much comprises what we call the micropyle that we've talking about before. Okay, so from this micropyle, you have sticky fluid oozing out of it. Okay, so the right pollen then are caught from the air. Other pollen are too, but if the right pollen are caught from the air, then you actually have seeds being produced. Okay, so the ovules become the seeds. All right. So these plants may be monoecious or dioecious. Okay, depending on the species. All right, so that's actually the ephedras, right? Now here we have a look at a netum. Okay, so most of the other species in this phylum are in the netum genus. Okay, and these are native to the tropics of South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Right? Most of them are vine-like, and they have broad leaves similar to the leaves of the angiosperms, but of course these are gymnosperms. And the best known species is a tree that's up to 30 feet tall, which is also called Netum niemann. And you can see this plant in Foster Botanical Garden, in the prehistoric garden, in the garden itself. Okay, so here's a look at it's like the pollen structures here. The previous slide that we saw showed the ovulate strobili, and here showing the pollen strobili, okay, of this netum. Okay, now the last group is the Welwitschia. There's only one species. This is a monotypic genus. Okay. Now this plant is native to the Namib and Mossamedes Desert in southwest Africa. Okay, so you can see that these three different types of neophytes are actually far away from each other geographically, right? One native to the southwest United States, one native to, let's see, Southeast Asia and South America, and this other one native to Africa, okay? And in these deserts, they have an annual rainfall of 1 inch or less. Sometimes they have no rainfall, okay? And these plants do cam photosynthesis, so their stomata are open at night. Remember cam photosynthesis? Remember the orchids go through that? Some bromeliads go through that. Jade plants go through that. Okay, Crassulaceas go through that, right? So they get most of their water from dew or condensate from the fog that rolls off the ocean at night, okay? And the stem rises only a little bit from the ground. The stem isn't very tall at all. And it's a form of a cup. We saw an image of Welwitschia earlier. We'll see one soon too. It's in the form of a cup that tapers into a long taproot. Okay. This plant may live to be 100 years old, can be 100 years old, maybe even more. And the stems may be more than 3 feet wide. That's kind of wide. But this plant only produces 2 leaves, okay? And these 2 leaves are wide, okay, and strap-like, and they have a meristem at the base, okay? So the leaves grow, but the leaves get tattered and split by the wind, okay? And they're dioecious, these plants are, so you have male plants with male structures on them, female plants with female structures on them, okay? So here's a look at Welwitschia. Okay, you can see the reproductive structures here. Usually when botanists or other people take pictures of plants, they usually like to show the sexual structures on them so you can actually help identify them, even though this would be readily identifiable just by looking at the vegetative parts of it. So there are only 2 leaves, even though they're split. You can see they're all split. And generally the leaves don't get to be much more than 6.5 feet long, just because the wind tatters them and splits them along their lengths. This is a very interesting plant. I actually saw a plant of this over at that garden in Pasadena. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, so there's a garden in Pasadena, and they actually had Welwitschia plants there. And then years later, I found out that they actually got seeds from some of these plants from that very garden. What was it called? Can't remember what it's called. Okay, now human relevance of the gymnosperms. They're second only to the angiosperms in terms of their impact on us humans, okay? For example, the conifers, okay? Many parts are edible. That's actually a quote from this man named Ewell Gibbons, who was a naturalist, and he made a lot of commercials for, I think, grape nut cereal in the 1970s or the 1980s, okay? So he was talking about pine trees. He mentioned that most parts are edible on pine trees. Now this was known to the Native Americans, okay, and to the early explorers, okay? The early explorers actually found a lot of pine trees that had their bark split off of them, okay, because it's actually the inner parts of the bark that is editable, okay? Because of course inside of the bark you have the phloem with its sugars, you have the cambium, which is also living tissue, because remember the bark itself is not living, right? So the Native Americans use this for not only everyday food, but for emergency food too, okay? And because it had sugars in it, it was sweet, right? So some of the people ate it raw, okay? Some natives dried it and ground it up, okay, for flour, okay? Some boiled it, okay? Some stored it as dried strips for winter food. Okay, so the early settlers in New England, you know, the people that came from Europe, ate candied strips of pine bark, white pine bark, eastern white pine bark. Okay. Not just that, is that both the natives and the settlers drank a tea of needles. You know, remember the needles are the leaves. And they use it to prevent scurvy. Scurvy is a kind of disease you can get if you don't get enough vitamin C. That's why they actually call the British Navy limeys, because in order to prevent scurvy, they would take limes with them on their ship and eat the limes. Yeah, because that was a real hazard aboard ship when you were going on a trip on a ship, or you were on a staff on a ship. In all the months at sea, if you didn't have fresh fruits, then generally you had scurvy, and one of the symptoms of it is that your teeth fall out. You know, so a lot of people in the olden days had bad teeth. So that's actually a standard for North American health, is North American teeth, which means that most people are expected to have straight teeth. Most people are expected to have healthy teeth, at least teeth that have seen the attentions of a dentist, you know. So one of the first signs of poverty of a person is sometimes bad teeth, which is very sad, you know. Okay. So here's a look at the pot of needles being cooked, okay, to make that tea to prevent scurvy, okay. So not just the bark, but also the seeds of pines are edible, okay? Now the pine trees of the western North America continent are the largest and the best tasting seeds, okay? Amazing. Yeah, we're so lucky. The protein content was like 15 to 30% of the weight of the seed, okay? And much of the remainder are oils, so this is very nutritious. Okay, a lot of calories in it, so you know people can eat some seeds and kind of not get too hungry real soon. Okay, so we had the gray pine, the ponderosa pine, the pinyon pine that these seeds come from. Okay, now Italians cook pignolias, okay, seeds of stone pine. Okay, they use them to make stews and soups and cakes and cookies. Doesn't that make you hungry? Now here's a look at a pine seed. Okay, here are the food reserves, which contributes much to their caloric content. Okay, and here's a little baby plant. Okay, this is a little embryo of the next generation. Okay, these would become the leaf structures here, and these would become the root. Okay, so here's some pine seeds, very good. Okay, now many of the so-called nuts that commercial bakeries use in the United States actually use seeds from the East Himalayan Chilgoza pine. Okay, that's kind of amazing because of course nuts and pine seeds are not the same thing. Okay. Now, the eastern white pines are native to the northeastern United States and Canada. Okay, they're used for masts in sailing ships, you know. So nice strong wood. Okay, the wood was also used for crates, okay, boxes, matchsticks, furniture, flooring, paneling. Okay, so by the end of the 1800s, the stands of eastern white pines had been decimated. Okay, there's not much more of them left. Okay, another tree that had been over-harvested, over-exploited, was the bald cypress trees in the southeastern United States. Okay, here's actually looking at the distribution of the eastern white pines. Okay, or where they used to be. The northeastern United States and parts of Canada. Okay. Now, new growth of the eastern white pine is promoted, also probably of the bald cypress, but most of the white pine that's used now in terms of construction and other uses are the western white pines of the Pacific Northwest, because the eastern pines, of course, I just said had been decimated. Okay. Now you also have something called the lodgepole pines, which are used for telephone poles. Nice straight trunk, you know. Railroad ties, mine timbers, you know, the wood that's used to prop up areas in mines. You know, when you see those old Western movies, you see that. Okay. Also used for pulp. Pulp is used to make paper. Okay. Now the ponderosa pine and other native pines in California have been severely damaged by the smog that is prevalent in Southern California. Okay. So the U.S. Forest Service actually introduced the Afghanistan pine, which is smog and drought resistant. Okay. Now this pine tree is from Russia and areas near Russia. Okay. It grows fast, but you know, as we kind of think now, it's questionable to introduce non-native species to natural areas because we have so many examples of the native areas and ecological balances being disrupted, of course, including in Hawaii. Okay. Much of the native forest in Hawaii, which is made up of koa and ohia lehua and also sandalwood or iliahi, have been cut down. You know, the iliahi, of course, harvested for the sweet-scented wood that it made, okay, for jewelry boxes, for fans, for rosaries, for various uses like that, okay? And the koas and the ohia lehua were cut down for use for, especially like in the area of Manoa Valley, to use for rendering whale blubber, okay, because there was an active whaling industry here in Hawaii, yeah? So I don't think there's hardly any native forests anymore on Oahu, hardly any, okay? There's very little left on the neighbor islands, but it's very important to try to do reforestation with native plants, okay, very important, because the thing is, you change one thing in their environment, you change everything. One example of that is, say, non-native earthworms being introduced into Hawaii, change the whole composition of the soil, bacteria and the soil fungi that could live in the soil, and that also changed the kind of plants that could grow in the soil at the same time. Okay, so many evidences of the destruction of this disruption. Okay, so here's some pines. Okay, a pine tree, a pine branch with its needle-like leaves, okay, female cones, okay, very nice images, okay. Now the southern yellow pines, also known as a slash pine, okay, would be used for lumber and also navel stores. So navel stores are actually the secretions that come out of the tree when it's wounded. Okay, navel stores is a term that came about when the British Royal Navy used this exudate from the trees as caulking and sealing for sailing ships. Not whaling ships, but sailing ships. It could have included whalers too. Okay, so these navel stores were partly made of turpentine, okay, which is a liquid solvent. So here you actually see a tree with its navel stores being harvested. Okay, and of course turpentine is used as a paint and varnish solvent. Okay, and then you also have another substance in these navel stores called rosin, which is a waxy substance. Okay, it's used on the bows of violins. Okay, it's also used by pitchers to improve the grip on the baseball. Okay, so what does a tree use these for? Okay, when a conifer is wounded, it exudes its resin, okay? And then what happens is the turpentine evaporates off, leaving the rosin. And the rosin helps to keep the plant from losing too much water, you know, from the wound. It also protects against fungal and insect damage as well, okay? Now the kauri pines of New Zealand, okay, are in a separate family from the true pines, but they are the source of damar, okay? And this damar is a substance used in very high quality colorless varnishes, okay? And damar was also originally the material used in making linoleum. Okay, linoleum has been coming in fashion in home decorating in recent years. Okay. Now amber, okay, is another substance from from resin. Okay, so amber came from extinct conifers that lived 60 to 7 million years ago in the Baltic area and also in the place that we call the Dominican Republic. Okay, that's where we get most of our amber today. Okay, these are lumps of translucent materials. Okay, much of it has an orange-yellow tint. Okay, but some lumps weigh amazingly 100 pounds. Okay, now the supply of amber was at its peak at the start of the 1900s, but has declined since then. Okay, very much so. And in fact, nowadays we don't have very much amber, coming in, and it's gotten much more expensive than it used to be. Now we're going to stop and we're going to have a demonstration to look at some amber and some jewelry. Okay. Okay, what we have here is some jewelry that I brought from home. Okay, we have 2 pairs of earrings and a choker. Okay, so we have this earring here. Okay, it's made up of like a kind of like a dark reddish kind of amber. Like myself, when I first saw amber, like when I was a teenager, I thought I hefted the earring or the necklace or the ring, whatever it was. I don't remember what it was, but I hefted it and I thought, this is like plastic. I thought scornfully, not kind of thinking that it's actually fossilized tree resin, which would make it lightweight, Okay, so that's some reddish amber. Here's some more of the golden brown kind of amber, another pair of earrings. Okay, so they have little inclusions in them because what the resin was actually exuded for with the tree was to actually cover a wound or kind of protect a wound that was made in the bark or some other part of the tree. Remember that these gymnosperms, these conifers, actually had these resinous canals, right, all over its body, right? So in here you have some inclusions. There would be substances that would have been on the tree, okay, as the tree was exuding its resin, okay. And now we have here is a choker made up of chips of amber, and you can see in this choker that you can actually have different colors of amber. Okay, and there are some colors that are not included even in this one that has a lot of different types of amber in it. Okay, but there is some that are almost green. I thought that we didn't have any of that in here, but there are a few. It's almost like a greenish color amber. Okay, there's black amber. Of course, there's a golden yellow, as you can see. Okay, so this is a little choker. I got the beads from Beat It, and I kind of just strung them and put the attachments on there so that you could close it. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to go back to the computer. Okay, we're back again. Okay, so let's take a look at some nice amber jewelry that, of course, I wish I had, But what we have here, we have some inclusions in here. I can't even tell what some of these things are, but it's very beautiful. Yeah, I have an acquaintance that has like a 3-strand amber choker made of amber that's all the same color. It's kind of golden yellow color, and they've been cut and faceted, and it's very elegant, So amber can be a good thing, except like many semi-precious and precious stones around the world, they're being mined and gathered all the way to being depleted. And in fact, in the past, in the Baltic area, the Baltic Sea area where a lot of amber comes from, it could be punishable by death for a serf or a common person to just walking along the lakeshore and collecting amber on their own. They could actually be immediately hung by any nobleman that might come along to catch them at what they were doing. So, you know, during a good part of human history and a good part of human prehistory, our lives were pretty brutal. So we're very lucky to be living in these modern times, you know? Okay, now other products from resin, okay? They're used for menthol and cigarettes. Okay, even though menthol also comes from other plants such as the eucalyptuses and the members of the mint family, mentha, okay? Also floor waxes, printer's ink and paper coatings, perfumes are produced from resin, okay? They actually have a scent called, not a perfume called amber, but a component of perfumes that they actually use amber that they've melted to actually put in perfumes, okay? Now the white spruce, okay, has been used for pulpwood, for newsprint, okay? It's actually the main source of for newsprint in the let's see, in the country, I think, maybe even in the world, okay? One midweek issue of a large metropolitan paper can actually use an entire year's growth of 123 acres of spruce, okay, amazingly, okay? And the amount that's needed for a weekend edition may be double that of a midweek issue, okay? So there was a famous publishing company. What did they do? They actually did it internally in their own, you know, in their own environs. They trimmed 1 inch from the width of toilet paper that was used, you know, in the area where their workers worked, okay? What did they find out? They found out that the employees used the same number of rolls when the toilet paper was 1 inch wider, okay? So what they concluded from that was that if all rolls of toilet paper were trimmed, okay, it would save 1 million trees per year in the US alone. That's amazing, okay? So something to think about. We can think about all kinds of ways to save things, you know, and conserve. And this is one way that I think some people have actually started doing this, because I think that some toilet paper rolls are narrower than they used to be. Okay. Now the white spruce also has roots that are flexible. So the roots that were split was used by Native Americans for putting together their canoes, for lashing the canoes, because of course they did not have nails, okay? And also was used for basketry, okay? They also brewed spruce beer from the young twigs and leaves of this plant, and they would actually flavor it. Well, here's some cones here at the tips of the branches of white spruce. It's a beautiful photograph. Okay, and they would sweeten it with honey or molasses, and similar to the other conifer tea used, they use it for scurvy, okay? Now the tracheids of spruces, you remember that the xylem is made up of tracheids, vessel elements in some plants, not in these conifers. But tracheids are actually a component of the xylem, right? So the tracheids of spruces have these spiral thickenings, okay? What do? They give wood a resonance to them, okay? So it made the wood of spruces ideal for soundboards, for musical instruments, such as the violin, such as the viola, such as the cello, okay, because it gives that nice resonant sound to it, okay? Now Sitka spruces have been used for wood for light aircraft, okay, the nice plane, picture of the plane there, and that nice picture of the Sitka spruce, okay? Now larches. Now I know that we in Hawaii are not familiar with a lot of these plants, because many of these plants are temperate area plants, but just bear with us, yeah? So the larches have some of the most durable woods of all conifers, because remember, conifers have softwood, right? So a fence post made of larch can last 20 years, okay? Especially in a temperate area where you don't have Formosan termites, okay? And also juniper wood and also bald cypress wood posts can actually be usable for 40 to 50 years or more, okay? Those are the larches. What a nice tree. Now there are about 40 species of true firs, okay? This plant is used in construction, used to make plastic, used in the paper industries for more pulp, okay? It's used for ornamentals and for Christmas trees. There's some Christmas trees all kind of bundled up there, okay? Now the fir that we know as Douglas fir is not a true fir, okay? But it grows into giants in the Pacific Northwest, okay? In that area of the country, only the redwoods are larger than the Douglas fir, okay? Another interesting fact about the Douglas fir is it is the most desired timber tree in the world, okay? It has strong wood, relatively free of knots, okay? Because of course knots actually weaken wood, right? And cause these hard spots in the wood that you can break your axe on like that, okay? So this Douglas fir is used for plywoods, okay? Also for large beams, okay? Now here again, overexploitation has almost eliminated the old growth stands, okay? On the mainland. Now the redwoods. Okay, two types, remember? Okay, we have the coastal redwoods, which are prized for their wood, okay? They have substances in the wood that inhibit growth of fungi and bacteria, like the other kind of conifers, okay? The wood is light and strong and soft, but a weakness is that it splits easily, so it's only used for some types of construction, okay? It's used for furniture, posts, greenhouse benches, wine barrels, and other things, okay? Now the giant redwoods are huge, okay? They're so huge that the first redwood that they harvested or cut down, okay, they built a double bowling alley, okay, from the wood of the first giant redwood that they cut down, okay? But good news, these are no longer logged, okay, because these giant redwoods are a big tourist attraction in California. Now that's smart to be using a plant, you know, in that way, you know, to attract people to come visit, you know, and admire the beauty of something that's alive, okay? But these redwoods are planted in Romania and Yugoslavia for timber, even if they're no longer logged in the United States, okay? So here's a look at some redwoods, nice big trees. I think they're majestic, you know. Now the bald cypress is resistant to decay, okay? And in the past it was used for railroad ties, coffins, construction, guttering, shingles. Remember we said before that the bald cypress has been one of the victims of over-harvesting, okay? Another thing about it is the leaves of this plant give a red dye. Here's some, looks like female cones here, okay, on this beautiful plant, okay? Now the eastern hemlock, okay, yields a dull red dye from its young bark, okay? It's also a source of tannins for shoe leather. It's a way of processing leather so that the leather becomes more durable for shoes and other purposes, okay? In fact, the tanning industry depleted the native hemlock so much that now they have to use and import tropical species to use for tanning instead, okay? Now the northern white cedar is also known as arborvitae, all right? It is an ornamental plant, okay, in temperate areas, all right? But the wood is pliable, so Native Americans use it to make canoes, okay? Nice, strong, flexible wood. Now the yews, okay, have a fleshy red arrow. Remember we talked about this before, around the seed. Here's a nice image here. Here's the arrow, looks almost like a fruit, but of course it's not a fruit. It's actually just a seed covering, seed coating, okay? And in here you can see the seed. It's open and the arrow is open at one end, okay? Now this arrow, of course, is, well, not of course, because you don't know it for sure until somebody tells you, but it's sweet and it's edible. You can imagine all the birds going nuts eating this arrow here. It's red. You know, of course, birds are attracted to red. Okay. Now the arrow is sweet and edible, but the seeds and other parts of the plant are extremely poisonous. Okay. And the wood is tough. Okay. Now the English yew was used for longbows. Okay, which were instrumental in the 1415 Battle of Agincourt. Okay, that actually signaled the end of the Middle Ages, okay, in 1415, because what it showed was that the English longbow was superior to cavalry. What is cavalry? Cavalry are men on horses, you know, with bows and arrows or with spears and such like that. But with this 1415 battle, they actually showed that the longbow, which was a new weapon at the time, was superior to the old style of fighting, and actually started the Renaissance. Okay. Now podocarps have edible seeds. You can see the seeds there, red, the edible part of it. Okay. Now the Pacific yew, okay. In 1989, Johns Hopkins Oncology Center reported that of 12 women that had advanced ovarian cancers, okay, and these ovarian cancers had not responded to traditional drugs, traditional therapies, including surgery, and they put them on the study, giving them a drug, and they found out they had a decrease of 50% or more in tumor sizes. So ovarian cancer is a hard to treat cancer, okay? Now this drug is called Taxol, okay? So in fact, there was one woman in these 12 women whose tumor shrank away to nothing. Okay, the tumor disappeared, okay, after treatment with Taxol, okay? Now Taxol is from the bark of the Pacific yew, okay? In 2001, Taxol was recommended for lung cancer and ovarian cancer, okay, for treatment, okay? Now the Pacific yew is a small tree and it grows slowly. It takes over 70 years for it to grow to full size, okay? Not just that, remember that the Taxol is actually made from the bark of the Pacific yew. If you remove the bark from a tree, what happens? Okay, remember the bark, and you would be removing the phloem, you would be removing the cambium. Okay, the tree dies. Okay, so what they're doing now is they're now trying to mass produce these trees, even though they are slow growing, and they're growing them in nurseries so they can harvest a drug from them. And of course, Taxol is probably very expensive, you know, as a treatment, and probably limited in treatment only to a few hard-to-treat cancers, okay? But this actually was a success of something that they call grind 'em and find 'em, where they actually get plant material, grind it up, put it in a petri dish with tumor cells, and see what happens. Okay, so here was a success story. Now the dwarf juniper has these arrows, okay, these fleshy coatings of the seed, and is used to flavor gin. Okay, there's a nice little what do you call that? Those miniature trees. They're called, they're Japanese, when you have miniature trees growing in a small pot. Anyway, so this is a nice example of that. Okay, now other gymnosperms. Okay. For the ginkgo, despite the fact that the seed coats of these plants, or of these seeds, have a foul odor, kind of nauseating odor, okay, the food reserves in the ginkgo seed, okay, has a nutty kind of flavor with a little hint of shrimp, so it's very desirable and very, very widely used for food in Asia, okay. So it's prepared by either boiling or roasting it. Okay, and they have imported ginkgo seeds that are canned, okay, that you can access in Chinese food stores in the United States. Okay, here are some seeds. Okay, now extracts of ginkgo have been shown to improve the circulation of blood. Okay. Extracts from the leaf improve blood supply to the brain and to the lungs, but the enhancement of memory has not been conclusively demonstrated. They haven't actually supported that particular claim that people make for ginkgo. Okay. Now cycads. Okay. You actually have Florida arrowroot starch. So this is actually a starch grain of a cycad. Okay, so you could get this Florida arrowroot starch, okay, from the cortex and the pith of a cycad, whose northernmost reaches were Florida, because remember that cycads are usually more in tropical and subtropical areas. Okay, but before they could have the starch extracted, they need to leach out a poisonous substance. Okay. And so cycads, outside of the natural habitats, they're mostly grown for ornamental purposes or for education, okay, and education, right? Now, in Louisiana, the leaves are used for palm sundae because remember, cycads look palm-like. They look like sort of like a cross between a palm and a tree fern, okay? Now, some species of cycads are nearly extinct in the wild. Here's a look at a cycad. Look how much like a palm it looks. It has these pinnately compound leaves. Remember pinnately compound leaves? You have the pinnae, or the leaflets coming off a central rachis. Okay, so one of these structures is a single leaf of the cycad. Remember that cycad leaf I brought into the lecture here and showed you folks? Yeah. Now, another thing about cycads is that generally some people actually eat the seeds of cycads, or at least used to eat the seeds of cycads, but they had sort of found out that the cycads have a symbiotic blue-green alga or cyanobacterium that lives among its roots, okay, and it's found to produce a toxin, okay. So some people eat cycad seeds, or they eat bats that eat the seeds. Okay, what they found is that this toxin that comes from the roots, comes from the cyanobacteria at the roots of these plants, actually travels up and goes into the rest of the plant, including the seeds, okay? So people who are eating the seeds of cycads are actually ingesting the toxin, or if they eat the bats that eat the seeds, they would be ingesting the toxin and building it up in their tissues. And I think that there has been some research that associated this toxin with senile dementia, or what we call Alzheimer's disease today. Okay. Okay, now joint furs, also known as ephedra. Okay, in the southwestern U.S., okay, it's grazed by livestock, like cattle and sheep and horses. Okay. Now the stems of some plants are brewed into something called Mormon tea, Okay, let's see. All right. And Native Americans and early pioneers actually used concentrated forms of this Mormon tea for STDs, or sexually transmitted diseases. Okay. They also ground the seeds of the Phaedra into flour to make a bitter bread. Okay. Look at that bread. Doesn't that look good? Now there's a drug called ephedrine, okay, that has been used for treatment in asthma and other respiratory conditions. Okay, so this drug actually comes from a Chinese species, and Chinese people have used ephedrine for more than 4,700 years to treat these asthmatic and other respiratory problems. Okay, now nowadays most drugs that we use for the purpose is synthetic. Okay, it's what some people call pseudo-fed. Pseudo-fed actually comes from the word pseudoephedrine, okay, or ephedrine, all right? Now the Needham, okay? There's one species that is used in Java that's cultivated for its shoots, okay? This particular plant is cooked in coconut milk and eaten, okay, that sounds good. And the fibers from the bark is used to make ropes. Okay. So here's a look at Needham. Okay. These are the ovulate strobulus. Okay. Actually making the seeds. Okay, now a living fossil. Okay, we're going to close it with a living fossil. In 1994, a botanist named David Noble went hiking during his Christmas holiday in Wollemi National Park in Australia. Okay. He stepped into a stand of trees, and these trees were thought to have been extinct for more than 150 million years. Okay, it was a grove of about 40 pine trees. This actually constitutes a Wollemi pine. Okay. Or Wollemia nobilis, okay? It was distinct. It actually is a new genus to science, okay? And it's in the Araucariaceae along with the Norfolk Island pine, okay, and also the Cook Island pine. But this Araucariaceae is found only in the southern hemisphere now. And it had a worldwide distribution during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, okay? 208 to about 66 million years ago. Okay. So here's a Wollemi pine. Okay. Look at that. It looks really unusual. Like so many trees in Australia, so many plants in Australia look so exotic to us and so unusual to us. Yeah. Anyway, the closest relatives to the Wollemi pine existed when Australia and New Zealand, Africa, South America, and India were parts of that supercontinent called Gondwanaland, right? Now this plant that exists now is studied by the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney and the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service, okay? And of course they carefully guard all the material that they have on it, okay? They have SEMs. Remember what SEMs are? Scanning electron micrographs of the leaves and the pollen of this plant. They've done DNA extraction, and they're doing gene sequencing of the Wollemi pine. And they're also practicing propagation so they can cultivate it so it won't go extinct. You know, since there were only 40 in the grove, there are about 40. Okay. So it's protected in a sheltered part of the park in Wollemi National Park, okay? And it also escaped when the nearest relatives died about 50 million years ago, okay? So it's remained hidden, okay? Which actually probably helped protect it, right? And they also keep the whereabouts of this plant a secret, so there won't be any pirates going in there and stealing seeds or digging up any trees, okay? So Walemi is actually an Aboriginal word from the Aboriginal people, who are the original first people of Australia. Okay, it means look around you. Okay, so even now, even since 1994, even now, okay, there's lots to explore and discover and understand all around us all the time. Okay. Anyway, so that's it for today. We finished the gymnosperms, and next time what we're going to do is we're going to start in on the angiosperms. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. Okay, I did. Again, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.